One of the greatest challenges in social research involves determining whether one social behavior causes another social behavior, event, or action. And this is one of the major aims of social research, is kind of trying to understand the causes and effects of social phenomenon. And that's one of the main aims of social research, explanatory research. It's one of the four aims that we talked about earlier in the semester. Establishing causality is a major feature of this branch of research. And one of the principal goals of explanatory research is to identify causal effects, and that is where a series of concrete events, thoughts, or actions results in a particular event or individual outcome. To give you a more concrete example, a lot of sociologists who study education are interested in trying to understand why students drop out of high school. Existing research suggests that some of the factors that predict dropping out of high school include stressful family changes, things like divorce, financial stress, things that kids experience in school, their test scores, their relationships with teachers, and also the parents' attitudes towards education and schooling. It also influence the likelihood that a child might drop out of high school. So just to remind you about when you're establishing a causal relationship, the factors that you believe are predicting a social phenomenon are the independent variables, the causes, and the event that occurs as a result of the causes, the effect, is usually the dependent variable when you're examining these relationships quantitatively. In order to establish a causal relationship, you'll need to meet three criteria. These include association, time order, and nonspuriousness. I'll review each of these in a little detail. Association refers to when two variables are related to one another. And that is, variation in one variable is related to variation in another variable. So when one variable changes, you observe a change in another variable subsequently. This is also referred to as like a statistical correlation, which might be represented by something like a correlation coefficient, which ranges from 0 to 1, and represents the degree to which two variables are associated as like a numerical indicator. Association is one of the first steps. It's basically linking changes in one variable to changes in another variable. This is often the first step in most social research when you're trying to establish a causal relationship. If you take, for instance, the relationship between smoking and cancer risk, there have been a number of studies which suggest that smoking is associated with a greater likelihood that one will die from lung cancer. And in the table on the left-hand side of the screen, it suggests that smokers have a much higher odds of dying from lung cancer. And the associations range from anywhere between 6.5 times more likely to 25 times more likely to die from lung cancer compared to non-smokers. And the degree, the extent, or the number of cigarettes that are smoked per day, you see like a monotonic relationship. That is, as the level of risk of cancer that's associated with smoking, it increases with the number of cigarettes smoked per day. This table suggests that there's a strong relationship, there's a strong association between smoking and cancer risk. However, it's not an association alone is not sufficient to establish a causal relationship. Another interesting example of an association, there there was a there were articles released in the newspaper last year which talked about a study that found that outdoor food advertising for that advertising in communities for fast food was associated with a higher rate of obesity, that they found that areas of Los Angeles and Louisiana that where there was a greater percentage of outdoor food advertisements in those areas, that people in those areas were more likely to be obese. And they established a correlation between outdoor food advertising and obesity. However, a study like this does not necessarily imply that outdoor food advertising causes obesity. It simply indicates that the the two variables, the percentage of outdoor food advertisement and the likelihood of being obese, are related to one another. The third criteria for causality is time ordering. Time ordering refers to the observation that variation in the dependent variable occurs after variation in the independent variable. So you want to make sure that the cause changes before the effect occurs. So if you take the example of smoking and cancer, that association, in order to establish time ordering, you would want to observe that somebody smoked before they developed lung cancer. Similarly, for fast food advertisements and obesity, you would want to see that the fast food advertisements were placed in communities before people started becoming obese. You would need, if you were to really establish a causal relationship between fast food advertisements and obesity, you would need to see that the advertisements were placed in those communities before the subsequent rise in obesity. Without time ordering, you won't be able to know for sure that one variable causes another. An additional causal criteria is nonspuriousness. Nonspuriousness refers to when the relationship between two variables is not due to a third variable. And the opposite of non-spuriousness is spuriousness, where the relationship that you observe between outdoor, say, one variable and another variable is due to a third variable. This figure displays a spurious relationship. So you have your cause, your independent variable, and you believe that it has an impact on the effect, the dependent variable, but in reality, the observed association between the cause and the effect is actually due to a third variable, also referred to as a confounding variable. And unless you are able to adjust for the confounding variable, it may mislead you into believing that there's a relationship between the independent and the dependent variable, when in reality, that observed relationship is really just due to both variables' association with a third variable. Now, I understand that this is a difficult concept to kind of incorporate into your understanding, but I'll give you a better example. If you worked in a hospital, you might observe that people who underwent radiation therapy were more likely to die, and you might establish that there's an association, that the people who receive radiation therapy have a higher mortality rate than people who do not receive radiation therapy. However, the association between receiving radiation therapy and mortality is actually due to a third variable, and that's having cancer. So, reality, having cancer is associated with both getting radiation therapy, and it's also associated with mortality. So the relationship radiation therapy, although it's associated with mortality, it's not a cause of mortality. Cancer is the cause of increased mortality, not radiation therapy. So the relationship between radiation therapy and mortality is a spurious one. It's a spurious relationship. There's actually an interesting website where you can look at different spurious correlations, and the website is below. This is one of the examples from the website. It shows that the dollars spent on science, space, and technology increases alongside suicides by hanging, strangulation, and suffocation. And this obviously is nonsensical and is obvious. It might be due to a third variable. If you think about it, it might be attributable to population growth, that both variables are associated with that the suicides by hanging, strangulation, and suffocation increases with the growing population, as does the spending on space technology. So the relationship between those two factors might be due to a third variable like population growth. Sometimes you can adjust for confounding variables by using a multivariate model. And this was a recent study that was published in the American Journal of Public Health, where they were examining whether solitary confinement increased the risk of self-harm among jail inmates. And they found that acts of self-harm were much more common among people who went through solitary confinement compared to people who did not. So they found that 53% of all of the acts of self-harm that they observed occurred among the 7.3% of people who were in solitary confinement at some point, which is disproportionate. And it suggests that there's a strong relationship between solitary confinement and self-harm. However, the two variables might be associated with other factors. So the researchers adjusted in a statistical model for gender, age, race, serious mental illness, the length of time they were in prison. And by adjusting for these other variables, they were able to strengthen their argument that the relationship between solitary confinement and risk of self-harm is maybe less likely to be spuriously attributable to some of these other variables.